Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, but there's no actual coffee. Each episode, we interviewed an expert in the field of law enforcement analysis to share their career-defining stories and to get their insights on the world. Please join us on recognizing and learning from these brilliant minds as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has over 18 years of law enforcement analysis experience, 10 of which with Buffalo PD and 8 with the U.S. Secret Service. She earned the 2003 IACA Executive Board Award and the 2008 IALEIA Award for individual contributions to the profession. She's an instructor and an author to many publications, including her book, Out of Bounds, Innovation and Change in Law Enforcement Intelligence Analysis. She's the OG of LEA podcasting with her podcast, Analyst Corner, and she recently started blogging again. Please welcome Deborah Osborne. Debbie, how are we doing?
I'm great, Jason. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, thank you for being on the show. It's great to catch up with you and talk about law enforcement analysis. My first question is pretty much the same these days. How did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
Well, Jason, one day, I remember the day well because sometimes you remember important days that change your life. I was taking a walk with my sister. We lived on the same street, and she worked at City Hall, and she saw an announcement for the job crime analyst for the city of Buffalo. There was going to be an exam, a civil service test to take, and so I was excited, and the reason she showed me the announcement was that we both liked Agatha Christie novels. There's some really young people who might not know. Agatha Christie wrote books from the 1920s to the 1970s, like on public television, on Masterpiece Theater. You could see Hercule Poirot, Belgian detective. But we both liked that. And also when we were little, we shared a bedroom, and my dad had a Chicago crime book, and it was pretty gruesome. And I'm 4 years older, and I used to read those stories to her and scare her. But we both had more hands-off, stand away interest in crime. We didn't want to be in law enforcement. It looked like I could qualify to take the test, so I did.
With the civil service exam, what kind of questions were on the test? Do you remember?
Well, the reason I qualified was that you had to be able to read tabular data. And at the time I was working for the state of New York. Also, one qualification is you should be have worked in government or some other places, but I was working for government technically. I was analyzing behavior. So you had to interpret written material. You had to be able to understand descriptive statistics, which I was using in my job and things like that. So the questions were very basic. It did not require computer skills, which was really silly. I did not have any computer skills. I can't even type still with more than a few fingers. So I was not really prepared for what I was getting myself into.
All right. So then what was the interview process like?
Well, the reason they were hiring a crime analyst, it was their first crime analyst. They were getting a records management system. And I can remember the interview also. There were 3 very tall men, officers, command staff interviewing me. They were just looking for someone who, I wasn't young. I had spent my 20s taking care of toddlers, watching Sesame Street, and pretty much most of my 30s working in the field of developmental disability. So I was just 40 when they were interviewing me. They wanted someone who could work independently, I think. And actually, after my interview, I went back to my job and I put my resignation slip in my drawer. I didn't hear from them right away because they were waiting for the records management system, which took forever to be put in place. But, I was kind of sure I was going to get hired.
Nice. So you get hired, and then as you mentioned, you're the first analyst at the Buffalo Police Department. So what were those first couple weeks, couple months like?
Well, it did take months before I did any crime analysis, but it was not really that easy. There was someone from the University of Buffalo who helped me a lot. She told me about the list server, LE Analyst. And so I got on that, and I asked people, what would you do if you were me? You're the first crime analyst. And there was a population at the time of 300,000 people in Buffalo and 20,000 crimes a year. And I knew that I was facing a big challenge, but Before I got hired too, I saw there were no books that I could find for crime analysis. And so I was a little bit worried, what is crime analysis? So I learned on LA Analyst. I went to the crime mapping conference in October. First, I was hired in September, went to the crime mapping conference in October and got a feel for it. And then I went to Steve Gottlieb's crime analysis class in December. So in January of 1998, I started analyzing robberies. We had over 1,700 that year. So that was my beginning point. We had a Lotus Notes bulletin board where we could every day review crimes. So I could read the narratives, even though RMS still wasn't in place. And even when it was in place, it didn't help me as much as that Lotus Notes bulletin board, because I read that every day for those 10 years that I was in Buffalo. And so I did want to say about my first robbery pattern, I didn't know it was normal crime in Buffalo. So there were 10 delivery truck robberies. So that was in my January robbery report. And I tried to do tactical analysis because I didn't want to get stuck in being just doing statistics, which is what people thought crime analysis was. One thing that happened is I started realizing right away that we needed intelligence information along with crime analysis information, because I had those 10 delivery truck robberies and I didn't have the intelligence piece that there was a family that was doing this crime. So I think that's a big obstacle for the profession. If you don't know about the criminals in your jurisdiction, you're not giving the full picture to people. So right away, I knew after, I was praised for doing that, and there were other robberies analyzed in there, but I was just giving the information without knowing the full picture.
Yeah, it's hard to paint that picture when you don't have all the pieces. So I think it's interesting because, as you mentioned, the size of Buffalo, this is about the same size as Cincinnati, Ohio, where I worked. When I was there about 2010, there's 7 analysts. And this is the late 90s, right? And you're the only analyst in Buffalo doing all this work and no experience coming in. They're also trying to get the position established. So kudos to you for coming in and reaching out first thing and trying your best to learn what you're supposed to do and learn what you should have known.
Well, thank you. It wasn't easy, and I was the only analyst for 10 years. I had interns, which anybody who has interns knows they vary in what they can do, but not only that, it's sometimes more work. Even though they're helping you, you have to design projects or assignments for them. I did have a few interns that were paid from the University of Buffalo eventually, who did mapping from their GIS program, but it was always me. And so I was advocating all those years for more analysts. And one of the problems was, and one of the reasons I don't like the idea that we always have to sell ourselves, is that we're actually selling ourselves. People will say, well, this is you, and yes, we'll include you or we'll support you. But it is really the whole idea of having analysts in law enforcement that matters, not whether it's me, So it was a frustrating and lonely time, actually, because people in the department didn't get training in crime analysis. So I was like the person who represented the profession without the people knowing what the potential of the profession was.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that analysis should be a given. It shouldn't be something that, oh, well, Deb's good at this, let's get her on board.
Or let's keep her, because at first I was conditional for the first year, and I had left a secure job. So I felt an urgency to prove that I could do something.
Yeah, I gotcha. And who was the professor that you were working with?
Her name was Dr. Pamela Beal, and there's some of those podcasts at your site with her. But she wasn't actually had a degree in English, but she really helped me in many ways. And I did some projects with all sorts of projects when I worked there. That was the nice thing about being alone, because I got to decide what I would do, but not only just decide what I would do, I could really help in a lot of directions. So it was never boring to me. So I helped the ATF with analyzing information. I did neighborhood studies with people. I was actually helped the mayor. I was in the mayor's office. So I was doing many things. And also, I don't know, I feel crazy. I finished my master's degree after a few years of being an analyst. I had half a master's degree in policy studies, but I changed the emphasis to criminal justice policy. I had quit because I knew I didn't really want to be a manager in my other job. And that was the only reason I could see to have a master's degree. And then I realized that policy didn't make sense, because policy isn't about doing the logical thing. It's about who decides get what resources, when, how much you spend, things like that. So I realized, well, it doesn't make sense there's not analysis. So now I understand it. So I finished my master's degree. I was teaching college, first in person, then online. I was writing different things, as you said. I was just very busy those years.
So with the robberies that you talked about, how did that get resolved?
They caught them, but what I ended up doing the next few years is I started a weekly newsletter, and I shared it to all these jurisdictions around me and the state police, and even in Canada, because literally I live 10 minutes from Canada in my house right now. So I would go up to Canada to meet analysts, because there were many analysts in Canada. I go to meetings in Ontario, but there were hardly any in New York State. So the robbery series, it was an inside job. It turned out to be an inside job. It was pretty easy for me to find serial patterns because I had so much crime. If you're one person and you have so much crime, and robberies were always my favorite to analyze because you had a witness. There were serial robberies, and so I could find them. It was something I enjoyed.
Yeah, and that gets us into your analyst badge story. For those that aren't familiar with the analyst badge story or new to the show, the analyst badge story is the case or project that the analyst works on. That's their career defining moment, if you will. And folks can have multiple analyst badge stories, but this particular one with you, Deb, involves forecasting robberies.
Yes. I don't really know when I achieved credibility, but I know that this particular robbery series was really noticed. There was a robber who would wear a red jacket and rob McDonald's or Burger King's. And I think it was probably around 9 p.m. at night. And because there was enough of a pattern, a geographic pattern, that I thought I could make a forecast. I forecast that he would hit, I think I said, the Burger King in a certain night, day, a week pattern. So what happened is the robber struck the McDonald's that was, say, parallel to the two main streets, one block up that night. So people started thinking that I magically forecast the robbery, even though it was the wrong place, because they didn't expect that someone could do that. And then it turned out, Jason, this robber changed his MO, and he hit something like a Dunkin' Donuts. Here in Buffalo, we have Tim Hortons. He hit the Tim Hortons that was just on the border of the district where the police met for coffee. We're two different districts. So the police were right there, and they caught him.
Do you know if he had changed his pattern because either running out of Burger King or McDonald's, or maybe he thought that the police were on to him, so he changed his MO a little bit?
I don't think he was that sophisticated. I have no idea, but it taught me something as an analyst to not assume things, because when you think about it, that is like a fast food restaurant, like Dunkin' Donuts is, Tim Hortons. You can go get a sandwich. So it was just that I wasn't thinking out of the box that far.
Yeah. And when you're doing this forecasting, was this what you had learned from the Steve Gottlieb classes?
Well, I was really fortunate to be able to go to a lot of training. That's the advantage of being the only analyst. The money doesn't have to be divided between more than one person when there's money. And I also did grant analysis. So I went to a lot of training. I'm not sure where I learned it. I have to confess, I'm not really very good at stats. I'm like the jack of all trades, master of none. So I can do everything, but I can't do anything the way, to the degree someone really more sophisticated talent can do. But I did use something. I can't remember because that was a long time ago.
That's funny that of all the places to rob, he robbed a donut place with an officer in there.
It was, and so everyone remembered it, and that helped my, more visible, because this is the guy.
So you mentioned that this gave you some credibility then, and so does this open the doors with some officers in a way and start working on different cases?
Well, I look back, and I believe I told you I'm starting to write my memoir about being a crime analyst. And I look back and I just think how fortunate I was, because I didn't really have too much trouble getting accepted. What my problem was is I was only one person. So I had to be careful not to promise to do things for people, because I had to keep up with this fire hose of information every day. Here's the crimes. If I took a vacation, I had to do that whole week's crime or 10 days crime. I didn't have that much trouble with credibility. Now, there were always officers. I would go to districts and present on what crime analysis was, and there'd be people laughing in the back. I had people who didn't respect my position or saw me as an administrative role that was being put upon them. But I didn't really have any trouble getting customers or business.
So then you leave Buffalo Police Department and join the U.S. Secret Service. Talk about that transition.
Well, in between that, I was teaching online and doing different things. And so I had a few years where I was very free. And I was really a little bit ambivalent about the opportunity to join the Secret Service just because I'm such an independent agent type person. Like I like to do my own thing. And I knew federal government was somewhat restrictive. But when I got hired by the Secret Service, I was in the same sort of situation. I was the first analyst in that particular field office, covering the district that was most of New York State, not the New York City area. So I was really the first person who was embedded there. I mean, they had used analytical services from the Secret Service. We had analysts all over the country, but we didn't have one assigned to Buffalo. So if I also had to do the same sort of thing, educate agents about what I could do. And the agents have dual mission. They do investigations and they do protection. So they were in and out of the office. Sometimes they weren't there as much as, to really get used to having an analyst. So I sort of do the same thing, but I had the support of the program, which was really helpful to me. And I actually liked doing that work better. I think I was better at it because it wasn't this whole city crime. It was defined investigations. And sometimes I did also threat analysis type work. So it was just like a crime analyst job, very varied, so I never got bored and I did enjoy it.
So what kind of cases are you working on?
Wire fraud, counterfeit, of course, counterfeit currency, bank fraud, financial crimes. I worked on task force in the beginning. It was like the tail end of the big giant mortgage fraud time period in 2010. One way I got credibility there too is I was working on a task force with the FBI, HUD, IRS, I think, and I did some charting for a mortgage fraud task force. I think that's my favorite thing to do is to make some kind of link chart, whether it's an activity flow chart or linking people together, how finances move. I like that kind of thing.
And then in terms of the threat analysis, then what things are you writing up about there?
Well, I'm researching. So someone's in my district who's made a threat. I also, during the campaign, was assigned in DC to do some candidate threat analysis. So I can't really say that much about that, Jason.
Oh, okay. All right. I got you.
That's the hard part for me, was working for a federal agency, was that even though I could get permission to do outside things, and I was given probably way too much free reign at the police department. But I also just didn't like asking permission. I was in my 50s. Why? I just really don't want to say, can I do this? Can I do that? So
Sure.
It kept me from being as much as of a contributor or as much active in what I do care about is that the profession develops and is accepted. And so I liked being in the Secret Service, but I don't like to be restricted. And that's my own personal thing. I'm not against federal analysts. I'm just probably not the typical person.
So do you have any lessons learned or advice for folks that may be at a police department and considering moving up to, or I shouldn't say moving up, but moving to the federal level?
Well, you get paid better. So, I mean, that's the problem with the profession too. We don't really have room for advancement or, limited pay. I would say to learn the kinds of skills you might use more in investigative analysis. And I kind of think I really liked that they changed the job title. I was hired as a criminal research specialist and they changed it to investigative analyst. And a lot of people didn't like that, but really even the people called intelligence analysts in policing, law enforcement, are mostly working on investigations. I would say to learn more about the techniques, but actually not to worry because you're going to get training just like you did in crime analysis and you have the skills. Some people might disagree, but I actually think that you have all the skills you need if you're a good crime analyst.
And then so now you are working for Scout PD. So for those that aren't familiar with Scout PD, can you say what that is? And then we'll get into your role there?
Yes, it's just really, I was fortunate to have my blog that is just me posting things I think are useful to crime analysts and for the profession, for their individual development, curious things, learning things. And this individual at Scout PD had seen my blog and asked me if I would look at a demo of their product in the summer. And then he offered me a consulting position. And I said no, because I like being retired, Jason. I've been retired, over 2.5 years now. I get to do whatever I want, and that's how I like it. But then I thought about it, and we had a little communication. So recently I agreed to do it. And Scout PD is a digital evidence management system. And so what it does is now, obviously, we have a lot more flow of videos and images in law enforcement and analysts, especially if you're doing something like gang analysis or organized crime groups, or if you're working in an investigation where you're getting a lot of video, whether it's from surveillance video at a gas station because they're skimming credit cards, and then a Walmart where they're using the credit card numbers and credit cards. You could have all sorts of situations where you're having video, also video tips, image tips from the public. So Scout PD, you have options, but you can have a module where citizens could actually submit video, and that's one thing. But now they've also just developed where you could share files. So let's say you have a case where you have a lot of video, you could share files with your district attorney's office or another agency that you're working with. But what, of course, is the most cool thing is the video analytics. And there's a lot of controversy about facial recognition, and they do have that, and it can be an option that's used or turned off for users. But it wouldn't be like Clear AI where you have all these images already in there. It would be images like your booking database, your mugshot database, or your intelligence. You could use the 28 CFR Part 23 section where you have a lot of safeguards you put in. And it can also just be that you analyze like activities and videos. But it's a service on the Amazon Gov Cloud, like CJIS, like the FBI, the Criminal Justice Information Service. So I don't know. I just think it's a cool opportunity because I've also been able to put input and what I, as an analyst, would think is needed to make it better. It's already all ready. So that's what I'm doing, but only on a part-time basis because I like retirement.
Very good. So Scout isn't a town in the United States. It's for Scout PD. This is a software Scout PD.
It is. You thought it was a town? Oh, how funny.
No, I didn't really. I was just being facetious.
Well, Scout is it's a little like German Shepherd image. So that's why, which I think is cute.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to get your advice on the profession. And I want to talk about a couple of the issues with the profession. And then we'll get into some of your personal interests. You're listening to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We'll be right back.
Hello, this is Brian Gray, and my advice for analysts is don't settle for mediocrity. If you want to be happy in this career, long-term, you can't be a minimalist. Just don't do what you're asked for. Do what you know is right. And don't ever, ever substitute quantity for quality. And if you haven't found a way to put design to work for you, you're not doing your best work.
Hi, this is Stacy Belledin. As an aspiring crime analyst, I tried to find any training available to learn from classes, workshops, conferences, networking, you name it. If I could give one piece of advice, it is to invest in your future. I see many analysts sit out of training not to go to important conferences because their agency won't pay for it. And that happened to me too, but there's nothing that says you can't figure out how to get there on your own. Submit a presentation on your work, and you may find that some conferences will waive your registration. Buddy up in a hotel room to cut costs. Find local opportunities on online training where you don't have travel costs. Just like you budget for a vacation or a child's education, you should do the same for your continuing education. It's worth it.
Hi, this is Tony Berger. I want to encourage each and every one of you to refuse to be offended. We're living in a world right now where everybody's talking and divided on different issues, and we are on social media, and what happens invariably is that somebody says or types something that irks us, makes us mad. And I just want to encourage you to not take offense to what other people say. Sniping back and forth at people serves no
Welcome back, Deb. We just went through that first section there. We went through your career in law enforcement analysis. But I find with your career, you have done things that I think are unique to a lot of us that were analysts at the time, because you saw there's nothing written about law enforcement analysis, or if you did find it, you read it, you consumed it, and then you moved on, but you were still yearning for more. And I think most of us in that situation are like, okay, we gotta go to training, or we got to reach out on the listserv, find somebody. And you did all those things, but you also began writing, and you decided, hey, there's not literature on this topic, so I'm going to start documenting. And I think that's your unique contribution to the profession. So talk a little bit about your decision to just start writing and documenting, and why you think documenting is so important.
Thanks, Jason, because I do think it's important, and I don't know why other people don't. So, well, I'm someone who, I was a voracious reader when I was young, well, my whole life. So, and I still am. But when I finished my master's project, which is actually so cool because it's available on the IALEIA website, it's called Crime Analysis and Policing. I knew I had all this information from Analyst and other people for new analysts. And I knew there were many people around the country who were in the same position as I was, the only analyst in a police agency. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to make a book, but I'm not that credible. So I asked Susan Whitford, who was Susan Wernicke, if she would be my co-author, just so I could have more credibility. And she did help me too. So I finished that book, and it has too many URLs in it, so don't buy the book. I'm not trying to sell the book. It was dated. It came out in 2003, and I got it delivered on my birthday, which was so nice.
Nice.
My first copy. And then because I wrote a book, I had the opportunity to become a research fellow for the Joint Military Intelligence College Center for Strategic Intelligence Research, which sounds so impressive, which it was. But I just was asked, I could write a book on anything related to this field. And so I interviewed analysts, and I wrote that book, Out of Bounds, based on some kind of organizational change model where I asked the high point stories of analysts and some other questions to find out what works when analysts are able to be effective. So the reason I did that was so that the wider world would understand that local level analysts matter. And that really bugs me because, you know, when you said I'm going higher up to the Secret Service, for me, crime analysis at the local level is most important because that's what affects my children, my grandchildren. You know, it's like my community, and everybody lives in their own community. And if we don't analyze crime at that level, to me, it's like a moral imperative. It's the right thing to do. So I wrote different things to make the profession more real, because if you think about it, there's more books about frogs and butterflies and everything else. And not only that, is the profession I came from, when I was analyzing behavior, had something like the DSM-3 to diagnose mental health issues, but you'd also have a taxonomy. Like, I think there should be, for crime patterns, like some kind of agreed upon worldview that a robbery pattern might include these things. And then if you see this thing, it might be a really bad robbery pattern. You know, that's just, it's just that there needs to be more material.
Key indicators.
Not just indicators. I think indicators, like I love what you said in one of the recent podcasts about when metal prices go up, it means you're going to see more theft, because that was one of the things I noticed really early in Buffalo when copper theft started increasing, that it was a global trend. But we should have all these little books. It should be really understood. It's really basic. So you have all of academia doing this cool research, but they're writing above us all. You know, we're working. We need like the basic tools. Like when I open my car glove compartment, there's all the information about my car. You know, if this light's on, this is what I do. And when you're starting as an analyst, all you're doing is talking to people who are going to training. You don't really have things written down, and because it seems like common sense, but it really tires your brain always to be having to think. You need it. You know, you need like reference materials.
Do you have a favorite publication or a favorite chapter that you wrote?
No, I mean, I don't. I always felt like I wasn't able to do that well of a job because I was working. I was just doing it because I care about it. One day I was at my desk, and I also wrote book chapters and all sorts of things. I was in the IALEIA journal. So I had a little pile of things that were my writing. I thought when I was young, I wanted to be a writer. And In fact, between my job at the police department and the Secret Service, I wrote a novel that had a crime analyst and an intelligence analyst as the main characters, but it was not very good. So I didn't try to get it published. So I thought, well, I am a writer. I'm not just the writer I thought I would be. So I guess I don't really feel attached to my writing. I feel like it's inadequate, because if I was in the psychology profession, which, I had a undergrad degree in psychology, I would never have achieved as much, because this profession's still like, now it's a toddler, it was a baby. It still has very far to go, in my opinion.
I find it fascinating that you are driven to either teach or write a book or get training because you think it's the right thing to do. Not necessarily that you want to do it, but you're driven because you feel that it's the right thing to do.
Well, it is the right thing to do, because public safety. So I said I'm a psychology major, and you have this thing called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the very bottom, you can't do anything unless you feel secure and safe, right? You need food, water, and security in order to actualize. And so that's really a primary need. And if we have all this information, so when I came into the profession, I thought, well, the police aren't doing this. They're not linking these crimes and either stopping the criminal or letting the public know, don't leave your laptops on your front seat, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be serious. That's not right. It's not right, Jason.
Most people mix it with both. Like, I like to do this and it's the right thing to do. And when we were talking in the prep call, you're like, I don't necessarily like to do that, but I am doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Well, I was recently reading a book by Viktor Frankl. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning, but this is called, I think, Yes to Life or something. And I don't know if he says it, but somebody I read recently said, what is life asking of you? So I have felt like different things have happened that have almost put me in the position where I had to say yes to it. It just seems like I'm in the right place at the right time.
I introduced you being the OG of LEA podcasting because you had the podcast Analyst Corner that you published that we have available on our website, leapodcasts.com. Why did you start podcasting?
Well, as I said, I was in between real jobs, and I thought, I just was always wondering, what can I do to advance the profession? But not only that, is what other opportunities are there for me? But there isn't really a real job for someone who wants to develop a profession. Like there's not a job you can apply for. I want to develop the crime and intelligence analysis profession because, as you said, I do believe in it. And so I was just thinking, what could I do creative that would be out of the box? And I actually really enjoyed making podcasts. And so it's like the question I can't ask you because you're interviewing me. Why are you doing it? You know the answer. We don't know why we do it. It seems like the right thing to do.
I think our reasoning is similar in that we're curious. We want to get different analyst perspectives on different topics. We feel that the audio file is a way folks can consume that story or that data. There's articles written, but we're just getting to other media. IACA, I think, just announced today that they are creating a YouTube channel, right? And so there's not a lot of other media out there for law enforcement analysis. I also think your book, Out of Bounds, you were interviewing different analysts then and getting different perspectives and trying to find the best practices. You're doing the same goal, you just try it in different ways, whether it's written in a book, an article, a chapter on a blog, or it's on a podcast.
And it's the same, sort of in the same vein, as I said, we need to create like a body of reference material and knowledge so that people could learn more and more. That's how I feel about it too. So I heard you say in one of your podcasts, you're having other people write each chapter of your book.
Yes.
And for me, it was also, there's just a part of me that just doesn't believe that people can't see what I'm seeing, because I already know almost everyone who's an analyst is excited about it and finds it to be so important. But why does the rest of the law enforcement world not really understand it the way they should. I mean, I had left crime analysis about 14 years, ago. And it's when I hear your podcasts or read other places that this still isn't really understood by police officers, I just feel so sad. I feel despair. And I guess it's sort of like a cause. I know someday it will happen, it will be integrated and normal, but I don't understand why it's taking so long.
Yes, it's moving at a snail's pace. And I tell people too about the podcast is I'm not a very good writer and I don't read a lot. So for me to write a book is probably not the best option for me. So that's why I'm writing this novel by interviewing people one by one in a chapter format.
You do a great job, Jason. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to develop the profession. The question I have for you is a scenario question. I want you to pretend that the president called you up and he is developing a new position called Law Enforcement Analysis Director. You're the first person to have this position. So what are some things that you are going to do as director?
Well, I don't know if I'd want that responsibility. Sometimes I feel like this invisible director, even though I'm definitely like a person who's an influencer that's not visible. But I would really have to begin by assessing the state of law enforcement analysis in the country, because we have too many agencies and it's really hard to know what's going on. And I know some other countries that they do things differently and sometimes better. And that's one of the faults I see in our country in law enforcement. We don't always look to other countries to just see best practices. So I would gather the best practices of the world and also the United States. And I would do an assessment. And I also would start doing a lot of education for everyone, including the citizens. If the taxpayers don't know the value of what we do, then why would they pay for it, right? So I don't know. I sometimes think there should be lobbyists for crime analysis, but if I was already the director, I would also find law enforcement personnel, commanders down to patrol officers who understand it and find out what isn't working. What can we do to make it better? How can we work together?
You're the second person I've asked this question to, and Deb Peel was the first one. And she suggested that we change the name because she didn't like law enforcement in it. And you are saying you want to create lobbyists.
Which you wouldn't think, but I have been trying to lobby and it's not working, right?
Yeah.
Hire people.
So what do you think well, let me ask it this way. What are you surprised by that law enforcement analysis hasn't figured out yet? When you started this journey 20 some years ago, late 90s, you would have thought, by 2021, we would have had this figured out yet. And we're still struggling to figure it out.
Well, it's a little bit hard for me to say because of working, more on investigations. But what I don't like is the separation between crime and intelligence analysis, like really understanding that whole picture that an analyst is an analyst is an analyst, And I think products too, I've had the opportunity of possibly receiving crime analysis products, even when I was working at the Secret Service. I didn't really see better products. I don't understand that either. I think also what I have seen is that people who are trained in one way, say you're trained with GIS, you're going to be looking at every problem as a GIS situation. If you're an academic in your specialty, you're going to look at it this way. I don't see really a lot of holistic viewing of the world. I see people living in their pockets.
So I guess in terms of the either crime analysis versus intel analysis, what would you like to see?
Well, I just think I just read something today. I forgot where it came out of, but it would just say, well, crime analysis isn't intelligence analysis, and it explains what they do. So like, forget intelligence analysis. I just think, yes, it's separate function. If I'm working on an investigation, it's specific, but I might not know that there's more crimes committed by that same person if I don't know crime analysis information. Also think that you can feel more elite if you're doing investigations, it's secret, it's private. And also that crime's more important because it's an organized crime group compared to the serial burglar. But I don't see the difference in a way, even though I've worked both.
No, I think so. I think there is too much put on the differences. And I think having two associations doesn't help, right? Between IALEIA and IACA. Having two associations doing basically the exact same thing, but totally separate, and driving home the idea of either advocating all intelligence analysts or advocating all crime analysts. Doesn't help that you have the different names of all the different positions you had mentioned earlier with Secret Service, the difference between investigative analyst and a criminal research specialist. If you would go through the list of the entire United States of everybody that's doing law enforcement analysis, you'd probably come up with 300 plus different titles for the positions.
Right. Like the person who worked for the FBI you interviewed, I don't remember what her name was, but she was in this position that I never heard of, where she actually worked more with sharing, but the FBI analysts I know can't really share. So I don't, there's all different jobs going on here.
Yeah, that was Mayor Cunningham, yes, from Minnesota.
Well, I agree with you, Jason. I just think what I have found, because I early on joined both associations, but I was doing crime analysis work, so those conferences really were more relevant to me, was that neither side really even is that curious about what each other's doing. And that's what I also think is, what is this lack of curiosity by not only the analysts from each other, but the curiosity of officers about what we do? I don't really get that. So if I had a magic wand when I am head of the whole director or czar, I would wave my wand and say, come on, be curious about what's going on. Curiosity is so important.
In terms of your teaching, do you have a favorite topic that you like to teach?
I can tell you what I don't like to teach. So I designed my own course, which was my favorite course because I designed it. It was crime and intelligence analysis, and it was for Empire State College, which is where I graduated from. In fact, I was invited to design it because of my master's project. So I had a module though where their option was to read a book or watch a movie about a serial killer, but then they had to, do analysis of the series. So that was part of the assignment. And I had to read so many papers on serial killers. I just really hated it. So, I mean, it was just too many, Jeffrey Dahmer, or just gross. I was just so tired of it. So I would say that, but I liked my own course, and that was my favorite. But you know what? I did teach for the American Military University a course on ethics and intelligence, and I liked ethics, teaching ethics too, even though I didn't agree with what people's viewpoints were always. If it was more like the idea that I do like philosophy and ethics, and I like the idea that we have to have values, in what we do. We have to understand our motivations and values.
So let's talk about your Analyst Corner blog. You had it for years, and then you just recently started back up again. So what was the goal originally, and has it changed?
Well, back in 2008, so I stopped working November 2007 for the police department. So in 2008, I was free. I was just realizing I could start sharing this information more widely. And I did back then have a lot of people appreciating it. And there wasn't as much stuff available for everyone as there is now. But I think I'm a good researcher for analysts, So I'm not just a crime analyst. I'm like more a researcher about analysts and analysis. So my goal of this is to post things that would be of use to analysts. And I do have places to look for a job. We'll take you to the different association sites, to the USA Jobs, different programs, different associations. But for me, once I started this part-time work for Scout PD, it just activated my interest again. And, as you have so wisely and perceptively learned, I don't really necessarily want to do this, but I believe in it. So I feel energized by it. It's almost like when I'm thinking of these things, I can't stop. It's like an obsession. It's like my hobby. So I don't know how long I'll do it. I do plan on doing it at least for a few years. If it helps anyone, that's all I care about.
Good deal. So we will have a link in the show notes for your Analyst blog. And again, if you're interested in listening to Deb's podcasts, we have those episodes up on our website as well. Deb, I want to finish up with personal interest of yours because you are a member of Mensa. And so I want to talk through that process of how you qualified for Mensa and why you did it and what you think of it.
Well, when I was in my 30s, I don't know why I took the exam, the test for Mensa, or 2 tests. You have to take 2 IQ tests, because my dad used to always say, "You're smart, but you're not as smart as me." And I would be like, that just annoyed me. It's one of those things that could be your pet peeve, So I took the tests and I qualified on both of them for Mensa. And I did go to some meetings, and I did let my membership lapse through the years, and I renewed it and let it lapse again. But what it did for me, which goes to show you about perception, the job I was working at as a behavior specialist, my boss at the time was always like red penciling little corrections on my behavior plans. And once she knew I was a Mensa, she stopped doing that. So it's had this advantage to be like, "Oh, you're in Mensa." I didn't really participate in it because I'm not that much of a joiner. I'm like the typical introvert analyst. I know there's extrovert analysts, but more are probably introverts. So I have to say too, I was just talking to my sister about this. I know I'm smart in some ways, but I'm also so not, right? Like I can't use a copy machine that well. I am not able to do a lot of mechanical things in the universe. So even though I'm bright in one way, that's only one kind of intelligence. And there's some areas that I'm like so subnormal that I have a lot of humility.
Yeah, we all have different strengths. Since you were taking the test at 30, does most people take it when they're young, like teenagers, early adults?
I really wouldn't know, but I think it's any age. I mean, they do have it for young people too. So I think it's probably people like me who had wondered. It's sort of like taking any kind of test. Like, I wonder if I'm really this. And I think, for me too, the idea that we have a left and right brain, even though they're really not separate, but that I'm also intuitive. So I like to write poetry. My husband's an artist, and I don't just like this. I'm very much have the other side too. So I'm not just analytical. I have an artistic side. And I think that also is a little different than some analysts.
Do you remember any of the test questions?
No, but there was 2 tests that I took. The one that I scored higher, which really surprises me, was not written. It had images. It's all these patterns. I mean, there might have been parts that were in writing. It was so different than any test I ever took. It wasn't like who was president in 1888. It's not like that. It's not like the GRE exam or anything.
Now, was your dad in Mensa?
No, I have to say, my grandfather had a meat wholesale business in the 50s and 60s before he died. And he probably had it before that, but that's when the mafia was really active in Buffalo. So my dad worked for his father, and my dad knew a lot of people in the mafia and would be telling these stories, so I had this like crime story childhood, and not only that, is my father was an iffy person. He wasn't a criminal, but he was, having to deal with the mafia all the time. So it was crime was part of my upbringing.
Man, the butcher.
Yes.
And
he was big, and he was intimidating. But my dad always, like, I dedicated my book Out of Bounds to my father because he would always encourage me to look things up. And, he was always proud of me. He didn't understand me, but he was proud of me.
All right. Well, very good. Well, our last segment of the show is Words to the World. And this is where I give the guests the last word. Deb, what are your words to the world?
I would ask analysts to ask themselves, what can you do to contribute to the profession of law enforcement analysis based on your own unique sets of talent, interests, and abilities? Don't be afraid to take the risks, because you're here to do what you're called to do. The progress of the profession depends upon people like you.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with, you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later, but I do appreciate you being on the show, Deb. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
Thank you, Jason. It was fun.
Thank you for joining us today on Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We hope you not only enjoyed the show, but also learned something new. For more information on our guests and information relating to today's topic, please visit our website at leapodcast.com. Special thanks to The Rough and Tumble for our theme song. For more of their music, you can visit their website at theroughandtumble.com. Also thanks to Kyle McMullen for our show logo. For more of his design, please visit his website at moderntype.com. The show is hosted, recorded, and edited by Jason Elder and written by me, Mindy. You can contact us both via the LEA podcast website. Please join us again next time as we interview another expert in this great field.